Big Shaq catches the maid doing the unthinkable, teaching 9 languages to his silent autistic daughter. No permission, no training, just results no expert ever delivered. The daughter speaks. The past unravels. A buried genius rises. What started as suspicion becomes a storm no one saw coming. And when the truth finally speaks, nothing stays the same. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The house on Laurel Ridge was too quiet for its size. A mansion, yes, stone-pillared, sunbathed, 1,000 square feet for every memory that had been lost in it. But the silence wasn't peace. It was the kind of stillness that pressed down on the lungs. It followed footsteps like an invisible fog. The neighbors called it serene. But to the man who lived there, it was anything but. Shaquille O'Neal, Big Shaq to the world, woke before dawn. Every morning, his body, trained for years to react like a machine, still obeyed that rhythm even though his days of NBA courts and roaring arenas were long past. He moved through his morning like clockwork. Protein shake, treadmill, cold shower. Routine was his anchor. Structure. He built that into everything, especially since her death. His late wife had brought warmth to the mansion. The music, the color, the laughter. But after the cancer took her 2 years ago, all of that had evaporated, and what remained was a shell of a home and a daughter he loved more than life, but couldn't quite reach. Mimera was 10 now, autistic, nonverbal most days, and extraordinarily intelligent in ways no specialist had managed to articulate. Her world was puzzles, routines, and silence. She didn't scream or throw things like other children on the spectrum sometimes did. Instead, she stared, with eyes that cut right through the world. And when she did speak, a word here, a syllable there, it was like hearing a foreign language in a dream. Every day, she followed her routine too. Breakfast precisely at 8, walks in the garden at noon, colored blocks arranged by hue, always from light to dark, eye contact avoided, touch resisted, words, if they came, never repeated. Shaq adored her, and feared for her, not because she was different, but because the world was cruel to the different. He'd hired the best therapists, the best doctors, changed them as often as the weather. Nothing had stuck. Nothing had drawn Mira out. Every expert said the same thing. Patience, structure, incremental change. But change felt like a ghost in this house. Invisible, and always just out of reach. The staff came and went. Nannies, housekeepers, aides. They'd smile brightly at first, post selfies outside the mansion gates, then grow tired of the silences and precision Mimera required. Many left after just weeks. Some made up excuses. Others just stopped showing up. It became a cycle Shaq no longer questioned. Until the day Alora arrived. She came with no fanfare. A quiet recommendation from a former employee. No flashy resume. Just a plain face, clear eyes, and an almost eerie calm. She looked like someone who could disappear in a room, even when she was standing in the middle of it. Shaq noticed that on her first day she didn't ask a single question. Didn't coo at Mira like others did. Didn't tiptoe or overcompensate. She simply watched, cleaned, folded linens with near-mechanical precision, moved through the hallways like a shadow, never spoke unless spoken to, and even then, barely above a whisper. By the end of her first week she was still there. No complaints, no questions. By the end of the second, Miara seemed calmer. Shaq didn't say much to Alora. He didn't need to, but he observed. The way she moved, the way she handled Mira's toys, always placing them back in the precise order. The way she adjusted her pace when walking past Mira, not to startle her. The subtle nod of acknowledgement when Mira flinched or tensed, then simply moved on, not pushing, never prodding. There was a presence in her absence, something unspoken that threaded itself into the corners of the house, warming them just enough. One late afternoon, Shaq returned from a meeting to find the sun casting amber light across the living room. He paused outside Mira's playroom. Something off, not wrong, just unexpected. A sound, very faint, not music, not laughter, something rhythmic. He stepped closer. The door was ajar. Inside, Mayara sat on her mat, her back to him, facing Alora, who sat cross-legged across from her. No toys, just a pair of flashcards between them. Alora held one up, tapped it, and said something softly.
It was in English.
Bonjour. Mira blinked. Alora repeated, slow and patient. Bonjour. And Mira softly, shakily mimicked the syllables. Shaq froze. He hadn't heard her speak in days. The next card. Salve. Alora said, her voice almost a breeze. A pause. Salve, came Mira's reply. Shaq backed away from the door quietly, his mind racing. What was happening here? Why languages? Who had taught Alora this? Why hadn't she told him? That night he reviewed the house footage. Nothing illegal, nothing inappropriate, just a rhythm. Every afternoon when the rest of the staff were gone, or on break, Alora spent 30 minutes with Mira, whispering, gesturing, flashcards in a dozen tongues, Swahili, Latin, Portuguese, even sign language. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't babysitting. It was something else. Something deeper. He didn't confront her. Not yet. He needed to know more. What drove her? Why her? What was her story? That night, as he lay in bed, watching the ceiling fan turn shadows across the ceiling, he thought about the way Mira had repeated those words. How certain her voice had sounded. How soft Alora's tone had been, never commanding, just inviting. For the first time in months, the silence in the mansion didn't feel suffocating. The next morning, Shaq passed Alora in the hallway. She looked up at him briefly, then down again. Her lips twitched, not a smile. Something quieter. He nodded once. Said nothing, but something had changed. Something small. A seed in the soil of this cold, polished house. And somewhere inside that silence, a new kind of language had begun to grow. Tone. Mysterious, hopeful. The morning sun filtered in thin slats through the blinds of Shaq's home office, catching the edge of a forgotten coffee cup on the desk. His phone buzzed softly beside it, flashing an alert from the security system. Motion detected in the east wing. Nothing unusual. The house always breathed quietly when no one was looking. But the alert kept pinging. A rhythm. Almost timed. Shaq leaned back in his chair, tired eyes narrowing, as he clicked into the feed. The timestamp was from just 5 minutes ago. Mira's playroom. He expected silence. He always did. Instead, through the grainy audio came the softest echo. Uno, dos, tres. Not Mira. A woman's voice. Alora. Then faintly, but clear, a mirrored whisper. Uno, dos. Mira. Shaq sat forward. His pulse quickened. He scrubbed the footage back and watched it play again. The angle didn't catch their faces. Only the side of Mira's profile. Her posture relaxed. Alora sat beside her, calm, holding up a card with a red dot, and the number 1 printed in bold. Her voice was low and fluid, deliberate, not instructing, inviting. They moved to another set of words. French this time. Elephant. Pause. Elephant. Shaq blinked. His daughter wasn't mimicking. She was responding, selecting, matching. The connection between them wasn't performance. It was exchange. He clicked off the feed and sat in stunned quiet. Weeks of silent observation had led to this. Alora whispering unknown languages like secrets into a room no one else paid attention to. No training, no permission. And somehow, Mira responded. He walked through the long marble corridor, his footsteps quiet against the polished floor, past the indoor pool, past the gallery wall of basketball photos no one had looked at in years. As he approached the playroom, he slowed. The door was slightly ajar. He didn't touch it, just stood outside, listening. Buongiorno. Alora's voice floated through the crack like dust motes in the light. Bon. Ingiorno. The echo again. Softer, hesitant, but unmistakable. Shaq's breath caught in his throat. His massive frame leaned against the wall, as though anchoring him to the moment. He stayed there for several minutes, eyes closed, listening as his daughter, once locked behind walls of silence, slowly, gently, began pulling pieces of herself into the world. Later that evening, he reviewed days of footage, not just today, a whole week's worth. Every day, always in the same hour window. Mira and Alora sat together on the plush carpet of the playroom. No iPads, no toys, just paper cards, shapes and a tapestry of languages. Latin, German, Mandarin, Swahili. Mira never looked away during these sessions. Her fingers traced symbols, her head tilted with focus, her eyes alert. There were smiles, even if brief. There was joy. Shaq leaned back, arms crossed. heart thudding with something between awe and uncertainty. Who was Alora, really? Why these languages? Why hadn't she told him? He pulled up her background file again. Clean. Too clean. A brief stint as a substitute teacher years ago. Some volunteer work. Gaps in employment filled with nondescript cleaning jobs. No credentials in speech therapy. No documented multilingual fluency. Just a list of households and short stints, each ending with either no explanation or vague references to personal reasons. She had slipped through the cracks. But here she was, unlocking something in Mara that no expert had come close to. The next morning, Shaq didn't follow his usual routine. He waited until Alora began her usual rounds, cleaning the library, organizing books that hadn't been touched in months. "You speak 9 languages?" he asked quietly from the doorway. She paused, book still in her hand, then turned to face him. Her eyes held no surprise, only patience. 12, she said, but not fluently anymore. Shaq stepped into the room, arms folded. Why teach her that way? Why not come to me? She listens when it's not therapy. Alora replied, when there's no expectation, just sound, rhythm, pattern. Languages aren't pressure to her, they're music. He didn't respond right away. Her words hung in the room, strange and profound. The other families, he asked, why did you leave them? Her gaze didn't waver. Most people don't like when the help sounds smarter than the experts. There was no arrogance in her voice, no bitterness, just fact. Shaq nodded slowly, absorbing more than he let on. I saw her smile yesterday. Full smile. First in a long time. She's beginning to recognize patterns in human sound. Alora said, every child on the spectrum does eventually. You just have to speak in the key they were born with. The mansion's silence felt different after that. Not heavy, not hollow, just waiting. Over the next few days, Shaq began noticing details he'd missed. How Mara now tapped objects with specific rhythms. How she responded quicker to certain sounds. How her eye movements tracked with precision when Alora switched between languages. It wasn't about understanding meaning yet. It was about recognition, memory, connection. At night he replayed those sessions in his head like old game footage, dissecting every gesture, every response, every syllable. There was structure beneath the simplicity. Something methodical, but it came dressed in gentleness. He didn't confront Alora again. Not yet. Something told him this wasn't just about languages. Something was buried beneath her method. A history, maybe. A reason for the silence she carried. And Shaq, for the first time in a long time, felt compelled to listen. The mansion remained quiet, but the quiet had changed. There was a pulse beneath it now. An echo that carried more than just sound. Shaq couldn't sleep. The footage of Alora whispering phrases in dead and living languages, of Miro responding with eerie precision, played on a loop in his mind. There was something in her method that felt too deliberate, too layered to be the product of instinct alone. And the way she had answered him 12 languages, not fluently anymore, was said not with pride but with a weary kind of truth. Like someone who once was something, and no longer could be. That morning, he made a quiet call to someone he trusted. Alonzo Tate, a retired FBI profiler turned private consultant, owed Shaq favors, real ones. He didn't ask questions. He just said, send me the name. Give me 48 hours. It took 3. When Alonzo called back, he didn't start with pleasantries. You're sitting down? Go, Shaq said, tension winding through his shoulders. Alora Mae Dalton, born in Hartford, Connecticut. No criminal record. Graduated summa cum laude from Howard at 19. Published in 3 linguistic journals by 21. Accepted into MIT's Neuro-Linguistic Cognition program for graduate work. Disappeared from academic records by 23. Shaq frowned. What do you mean, disappeared? She was erased, Shaq. Not expelled. Not failed. Just erased. No published thesis. No committee defense. No graduation. It's like she never existed there. Except she did. Shaq paced the edge of his private gym. Jaw tight. What happened? Alonzo's voice was clipped. Her thesis proposed something radical. Said that cross-linguistic tonal mimicry, particularly in children on the autism spectrum, could unlock early verbal patterning, a new kind of communication bridge, especially in non-verbal children. She claimed to have tested it successfully, showed preliminary data, and she got destroyed for it. One of the professors on her committee leaked a memo claiming her data was fabricated. Anonymous complaints followed. Then a formal inquiry. No proof she cheated. None. But the damage was done. Thesis denied. Lab access revoked. She was blackballed. Shaq felt a heavy weight in his chest. And the professor? Alonzo chuckled dryly. Gregory Stanis. MIT Golden Boy. Published a near-identical paper 2 years later, under his own name. Got a $5 million grant to develop neurophonetic alignment tools for speech rehabilitation in special needs children. Won 2 awards. Shaq's silence burned on the line. She tried to fight it, Alonzo continued. Filed a grievance. But she had no legal ground, no mentor, no institution backing her. And Stanis? White. Connected. Tenured. She vanished. Why didn't she go public? Shaq asked. Shaq, she's a black woman in a white-coded field. Linguistics isn't neutral. Neither is academia. You don't get to be the whistleblower without a microphone. She was 23. She was broke. She didn't stand a chance. Shaq ended the call and sat alone in the dim light of his home theater. The screens dark but the weight of truth illuminating everything. Alora hadn't just been whispering sounds into his daughter's mind. She had been rediscovering pieces of herself, rebuilding a lost theory. Not for prestige, not for redemption, but because she saw something no one else had, and still chose to speak. He pulled her employment form from the file drawer. It was sparse, intentional, a protective cloak. But now he saw the pattern. The staff jobs, the silence, the quiet knowledge beneath her stillness. It was survival, not just from scandal but from systemic annihilation. He thought about the way she had sat beside Miara, not demanding engagement, just offering sounds like breadcrumbs on a path, and how his daughter, for the first time in her life, had followed. That afternoon, Shaq called in a favor from an old friend who ran a university archive. I need any draft or backup thesis submitted by Alora May Dalton between 2012 and 2014, he said. 2 hours later, a scan arrived in his inbox. Title: Neurotonal Mimicry, an Emergent Pattern Recognition in Nonverbal Pediatric Subjects, by Alora M. Dalton. Shaq printed every page. It was meticulous, dense, but it read like music. Every hypothesis matched what he had seen in the playroom. Pattern scaffolding, tonal repetition, a linguistic bridge, designed not to impose language, but to tune it to the mind of the child. There were field notes, diagrams, even a pilot trial done with 3 children, all showing signs of improved verbal response using cross-linguistic tonal exposure. She had been onto something revolutionary, and they had buried her for it. That evening, Shaq returned home and found Alora in the garden, clipping dead leaves from the herb boxes. Minerva sat nearby on a bench, tracing lines in a sand tray, humming to herself a tune Shaq didn't recognize, but somehow knew had structure. Alora looked up but said nothing. Shaq handed her the printed thesis. She stared at it, didn't take it. I know what they did to you, he said quietly. A long silence. Then she reached for the papers. Her hands trembled, just slightly. No one believed me, she said, eyes scanning the text like it was a ghost, returned. I believe you now. She looked up, pain and gratitude flickering behind her calm. It was never about being right, she said. It was about being heard. I thought I'd never hear myself again. Shaq glanced over at his daughter. She had begun softly singing the numbers from 1 to 10 in Italian, and then again, backward. He turned back to Alora. You gave her more than language. You gave her connection. No, Alora whispered. She gave me a reason to try again. There was no applause, no grand recognition. Just 2 people, wronged by systems larger than them, standing in the hush of a garden where something beautiful had quietly begun to bloom. And for the first time, Shaq realized this wasn't about finding a miracle for his daughter. It was about unearthing the one the world had tried to erase. It started with color. Shaq stood quietly behind the tall window panes of the breakfast lounge, coffee cooling in his hand, eyes fixed on the garden. It was late afternoon, and golden light slipped lazily through the trees. The air outside shimmered in the way it did just before dusk, when time seemed to pause. Alora and Mayra sat on a striped blanket, near the rose hedges, surrounded by bowls filled with smooth painted stones, red, green, blue, yellow, lavender, black. Their positions weren't random. Each bowl was set at a calculated distance from the next. Between them lay a worn spiral notebook, its pages fluttering in the breeze. Shaq watched as Miara tapped 2 red stones together, then paused. Allura nodded. 3 claps followed. Slow, steady, precise. Then Miara touched the yellow bowl, smiled faintly, and pressed her hand to her chest. A system. Shaq's breath caught. He leaned closer to the glass. The outside world now a stage in a quiet symphony. Only 2 people knew how to play. Allura raised her hand and snapped twice, paused, then tilted her head slightly to the right. Miara mirrored her. Then came the word, barely audible through the pain, but unmistakable. Floor, French for flower. Shaq watched, stunned, as Miara giggled, full, melodic, uncontained. She mimicked the snap and whispered the word again, floor. Shaq hadn't heard that laugh in years. Not since before she lost her mother. Not since silence became her refuge. He sat down slowly, never looking away, overwhelmed by something he didn't know how to name. Gratitude, maybe. Awe. Heartache wrapped in wonder. Miara had language now, not in the way textbooks defined it, but in the way hearts recognized it. It wasn't just speech, it was connection, structure, emotion with shape. Over the next few days, he made it a ritual. Mornings were still his own. Exercise, calls, business. But afternoons, he watched. Not out of suspicion anymore. Out of reverence. Each session was different. Some days involved sound rhythmic clapping, subtle variations in pitch and beat. Other days used only color and sequence, with Allura guiding Miara through carefully arranged patterns. Then there were movement drills, standing, stepping forward, swaying to a count, where each action corresponded to a specific word or phrase in one of the many languages Allura had once mastered and now repurposed like threads weaving a private tapestry. No 2 sessions repeated. Nothing ever felt forced. Miara remained utterly engaged. More alive. Her expressions, once flat or vacant, now sparked with mischief. At one point she teased Allura by deliberately swapping a sequence, replacing a green stone with black, smirking before correcting herself. Allura didn't scold her. She smiled back. Shaq could almost hear his late wife's voice whisper in his head. You're seeing her now, the real her. He couldn't shake the thought. This woman, this quiet, wounded genius, was accomplishing what credentialed professionals with cold offices and framed diplomas had failed to do. She didn't talk at Miara. She listened to her rhythm, followed it like music, matched her step for step, sound for sound, until Miara chose to lead. Shaq kept his distance, but not his silence. He began taking notes, not surveillance anymore, documentation, recording breakthroughs, marking Mara's changes, even printing out frames from the footage where she smiled, pointed or clapped with glee. There were dozens now. His study, once filled with awards and sports memorabilia, was slowly turning into a gallery of Mara's milestones. But for all the light Allura brought into the household, Shaq couldn't ignore one looming shadow. She was breaking rules. No certifications. No formal plan. No signed therapies approved by specialists or state coordinators. What Allura was doing with Miara, however brilliant, was unlicensed, and if word got out it could cost him custody, or worse, her freedom. He hadn't confronted her about it. Not yet. Because deep down, he knew, rules were written by people who never stood where he was standing, who had never fought for connection with a child, locked in silence, who had never seen what he now saw every single day. The rules didn't know Miara, but Allura did. Still, the fear gnawed at him. One misstep, one visitor who didn't understand, one bureaucrat with a clipboard, and this fragile, blooming world could vanish. Late one evening, after Miara had gone to sleep, Shaq found Allura in the garden, refilling the bowls with freshly painted stones. Her hands moved carefully, her posture relaxed but precise. Why colors? He asked softly, not startling her. Allura looked up, the dusk light catching the tiredness beneath her calm. Color carries emotion before meaning, she said. For Miara, red doesn't just mean red. It means energy, warmth, a starting point. That's where we begin. He nodded. And the claps? Tones. The body remembers vibration even when it can't interpret speech. Shaq sat down on the stone bench beside her, his large frame heavy in the quiet night. I watch you two every day, he said. I know. She didn't sound defensive, just aware. He glanced toward the darkened window of Miara's room. What you're doing it's changing her. It's changing everything. Allura set a blue stone gently into the bowl. She's not the only one it's changing. Shaq didn't respond at first. There was something in the way she said it, like she was speaking of herself, not seeking pity but acknowledging transformation. I want to protect this, he finally said. But what you're doing, it doesn't exist on paper, and the world doesn't trust what it can't measure. I'm not doing this for them, Alora said quietly. I'm doing it for her. She found me when I didn't believe in what I knew anymore. And now I see everything differently. The sky turned darker. A soft wind picked up. The scent of rosemary and jasmine drifted around them. Shaq stood slowly. If you ever want this to be more than just moments in my garden, if you ever want to show the world what you've created, I'll help you, on your terms. Alora didn't answer, but her eyes for the first time glistened with something close to tears. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. Because under the hush of twilight, and beside the bowls of color and code, something rare had taken root. Trust. And like all living things in that garden, it was finally beginning to grow. The story didn't break with a bang. It bled. A whisper, a murmur, a headline on a niche parenting blog. Sources claim NBA legend uses unlicensed caregiver for special needs daughter. It had no photo, no quote, just a single sharp-edged sentence. Uncertified maid allegedly administering therapy without medical clearance. Shaq saw it during a late-night scroll, eyes burning from too little sleep. His thumb froze. The pit in his stomach opened. By morning it was everywhere. National gossip outlets. Sensationalist headlines. Commentators feeding on the bait like sharks in bloodied water. Big Shaq's house help crossing legal lines. An NBA icon accused of endangering autistic daughter's well-being. Mystery woman posing as therapist. A mansion's calm shattered. Within 48 hours, 2 social workers from the state arrived unannounced. They flashed IDs, asked to observe Manura, and requested a sit-down with her current behavioral support provider. Shaq was calm, direct. You'll speak to me, and only me. But Miora had seen them. She retreated into her room, closing the door, the lock clicking softly behind her. Alora stood silently by the window, arms crossed, her usual calm replaced by a pale rigidity. She didn't speak, even when they mentioned intervention protocol and review of custody placement. She didn't flinch, even when they cited statutes about unlicensed care. She'd been through this before. One of the workers, a man who'd rehearsed this speech too many times, pulled Shaq aside. We understand your intentions, Mr. O'Neill. But the law is clear. This woman is not a licensed therapist. What she's doing is classified as unauthorized behavioral treatment. Continuing this could jeopardize your guardianship rights. Shaq didn't yell, didn't argue. He simply stared at the man for a long moment and said, "Get out of my house." They left, but they didn't go far. A formal investigation was opened the next day. Papers were filed. His legal team called in. Risk assessments were scheduled. The word custody violation was uttered more than once. Shaq had seen many kinds of battles in his life, but nothing like this. This wasn't about a bad choice or a mistake. This was about someone powerful deciding what healing should look like, and punishing anyone who dared to define it differently. He met with his legal advisor that same evening. They're using the perfect storm against you, she explained. A high-profile client, a vulnerable child, and an uncredentialed woman with a history of academic controversy. You're walking a tightrope. Shaq folded his arms, jaw tight. They want me to fire her. More than that. They want her gone. They want her discredited again. They want to erase the risk she represents to their system. She's helping my daughter in ways no one ever has, and that terrifies them. Meanwhile, Alora remained silent. She didn't offer defense, didn't argue. Instead, she asked Shaq only once, "Do you want me to leave?" He shook his head. "I want the truth to stay." But the walls were closing in. Paparazzi now staked out the end of the private drive. Articles deep-dived into Alora's vanished academic past, labeling her a disgraced researcher and dangerous autodidact. Her thesis, once forgotten, was now dissected by panels of pundits who'd never read it, but knew exactly how to dismiss it. Nera sensed the shift. Her behavior changed. She began pulling her hair again, refusing the garden sessions, sitting with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, blocking out sounds. The bright rhythm Alora had carefully nurtured, dim. One afternoon, Alora found her huddled behind the curtain, whispering in Spanish to no one. Just fragments. Just echoes. Shaq watched from the doorway. "She's scared," Alora said softly, stroking Miora's back in the rhythm they'd built together. They're trying to take the pattern away. Shaq felt helpless, furious. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was a war waged in whispers, waged with bureaucracy and quiet threats, where credentials mattered more than outcomes and race was always part of the calculus. So he fought back the only way he could. He went public. No interviews, no sound bites, just a written statement, released on his own platform, unfiltered. My daughter has made more progress in 3 months, with a woman the world calls unqualified, than she did in 3 years with so-called experts. I've seen what healing looks like. I've seen what brilliance sounds like. Her name is Alora Dalton, and the system failed her before it ever tried to understand her. It will not fail my daughter. The post went viral within hours. Support poured in, quietly, cautiously. Parents of autistic children, teachers, speech therapists who whispered behind locked accounts. She's right, we've seen it too, but with it came more scrutiny. Child Protective Services requested a formal hearing. The judge assigned was known for her no-nonsense rulings. The date was set. 2 weeks. Shaq's legal team was sharp, prepared, but even they warned him. There's a real chance they'll force your hand. In the midst of the chaos, Alora remained composed. She still arrived every morning, spoke gently to Mara even when she didn't respond, adjusted her methods, and documented everything. She wasn't fighting to be proven right. She was fighting not to be erased again. One evening, after a long silence, she sat across from Shaq at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. The storm, for now, paused. I never expected you to defend me, she said. You didn't ask, he replied. But you defended her, without permission, without fear. I'm just returning the truth. She smiled, tired, but grateful. In the darkness outside, the garden waited. Shaq knew it wouldn't be long before someone tried to shut it down completely. But he also knew this. Truth, when whispered long enough, begins to echo, and echoes don't disappear. Shaq had learned, long ago, that the real wars didn't happen on courts or in headlines. They happened behind closed doors, in locked offices, in conference rooms, where people with polished smiles and sharpened agendas carved up truth for sport. And now, he found himself inside one of those silent battlefields. He didn't trust the press, didn't trust the state, so he built his own defense, quietly, off the books. A week after the CPS hearing was set, a team assembled in the windowless basement of a private firm in Pasadena. 3 experts, a digital forensics analyst, an academic archivist, and a retired university administrator named Clara Duell, who had once blown the whistle on tenure manipulation at a prominent Ivy League. They weren't here to make Alora look good. They were here to prove she had been destroyed. Shaq provided everything he had: her original thesis draft, archived footage from the mansion, background on Professor Gregory Stanis. Clara took one look at the file and sat back in her chair, arms crossed. I know this pattern, she said. You don't erase someone this completely unless they threaten something bigger than their field. The archivist began combing through MIT's 2014 dissertation index. Alora's name wasn't there, but a paper filed 3 semesters later, under a doctoral candidate named Cameron Stanis, Gregory Stanis's son, bore a striking resemblance. Shaq read the title out loud: Multilingual Cognitive Bridging in Early-Stage Spectrum Disorders. It wasn't just similar, it was her thesis. Watered down, reworded, repackaged, but the structure, the hypothesis, the methods, even the table formatting matched line for line. The footnotes had been re-referenced, but several citations pointed to older drafts of the same papers Alora had used. Clara scrolled through a PDF side by side with Alora's. Her fingers stopped.
Here, she said. See this paragraph.
It uses a phrase Alora coined in a 2012 unpublished abstract, tonal mimicry scaffold. That term didn't exist before her. The digital analyst dug deeper, pulling metadata from the Stanis paper submission. It had been submitted using Cameron's credentials, but the original file author was listed as E. Dalton, MIT. Alora Dalton. He looked up, face pale. They didn't even scrub the file data properly. It was the academic equivalent of leaving fingerprints at a crime scene. Shaq's jaw tightened as he stared at the screen. It wasn't just theft, it was erasure. A methodical one, designed not only to steal Alora's work, but to ensure she'd never be able to reclaim it. Clara kept digging. She found archived emails between Gregory Stanis and a department chair from the same year Alora was dismissed. One thread read, We need to minimize fallout. Discredit the theory. If she pursues legal action, we'll shift focus to misconduct. She has no allies. The archivist highlighted another line, buried at the bottom of an internal committee memo. Dalton's thesis poses reputational risk. Recommend denial without formal inquiry. Shaq felt his stomach turn. This was orchestrated. A deliberate sabotage buried under layers of bureaucracy and tenure politics. They hadn't just ruined her career. They'd rewritten her discovery into someone else's legacy. He looked at Clara. Can this be verified? She nodded. With time-stamped drafts, file authorship metadata, and publication trails. Yes, this is more than enough for an academic tribunal, and potentially, a civil lawsuit.
But that wasn't what Shaq wanted.
He didn't want revenge. He wanted exposure and protection. He commissioned the team to prepare a full investigative dossier, one that would hold up under legal scrutiny, but also tell a story the public could follow. A truth too detailed to be denied, and too ugly to be ignored. In parallel, his legal team prepared a defense strategy not just for the custody hearing, but for any potential litigation Alora might face. By the time the second week arrived, the file was ready. 58 pages of documentation, side-by-side thesis comparisons, metadata screenshots, archived emails, an appendix of testimonies from former students and faculty who remembered Alora's research before it vanished. Some even confessed anonymously to being told not to support her. Shaq stared at the last page, a timeline of her academic career from prodigy to pariah. He'd seen a lot of betrayal in his life. Deals gone bad, contracts twisted. But this was deeper. This was the theft of a mind. He handed the report to Alora late one evening, in the same kitchen where they'd once shared silent glances over tea and painted stones. She flipped through the pages slowly. Her face didn't move, but her hands trembled. They kept saying I imagined it, she said, voice hollow. That I was just paranoid. That I didn't understand the system. You understood it too well, Shaq replied. That's why they had to burn it down around you. She didn't speak again that night. But she didn't have to. The next day, Shaq sent a summary of the report sanitized, legal ready to a respected journalist he trusted, not a gossip peddler, a Pulitzer-nominated writer known for long-form exposés on institutional injustice. He didn't ask for a favor. He asked for light. And by the time the sun rose the following morning, the fire had begun to spread. The article dropped at noon. Erased how academia stole a black woman's breakthrough and gave it to a legacy kid. It included charts, screenshots, redacted email excerpts, comparisons between Alora's thesis and Cameron Stannis's paper. It quoted neurolinguists who backed her methods. One said, her theory was ahead of its time. They buried her because she embarrassed them. The piece went viral within hours. Professors from other institutions weighed in. Advocacy groups demanded investigations. A university board quietly announced it was reviewing its 2014 internal processes. Gregory Stannis declined to comment. Shaq didn't gloat, didn't even speak publicly. He didn't need to, because the truth was louder than any press conference. At home, Mayra had begun humming again. Her claps returned softer but steady. She had started naming colors again, whispering phrases in 3 languages under her breath as she arranged her stones. The pattern was returning. Shaq stood in the garden, watching Alora and Mayra move through a new sequence. One that involved no stones, just eye contact and breath. A new code. Not from a book, not from a grant, but from a bond that no institution could ever manufacture. And somewhere behind the cold walls of power and prestige, the echoes of what they tried to bury had finally found their way to the surface. This was no longer a quiet rebellion. This was justice whispered, proven, and now, undeniable. The courthouse sat under a heavy sky. The morning light hadn't broken fully. A dull gray canvas loomed overhead, like the air itself was holding its breath. Inside courtroom B, the walls were lined with quiet tension. Reporters, legal aides, CPS officials, a gallery of polished faces, and hidden agendas. But at the front table, surrounded by lawyers and case files, sat a father and his daughter, and beside them, the woman the system wanted erased. Shaq didn't speak much that morning. His expression was unreadable. He held Mara's hand, her fingers small but wrapped tightly around his thumb, and tapped gently in a rhythm. Only the two of them understood. 1, 2. Pause. 1, 2, 3. The code she responded to when language fell short. Alora sat beside them, calm on the outside, but her eyes betrayed the truth. They flicked to the exit once, then back to Mira. She knew how these hearings worked. Once CPS had enough momentum, the system rarely let go. And this time, it wasn't just about her. It was about whether she would ever be allowed near Mira again. The judge entered. Gavel tapped. Proceedings began. The CPS attorney, all confidence and crisp phrasing, opened with controlled force. This is not a trial of character, Your Honor. It's about compliance, safety and the law. Miss O'Neill knowingly allowed an unlicensed, unverified individual to provide behavioral and linguistic intervention to his daughter, a minor with advanced neurodivergent needs. Regardless of personal belief, this is a breach of protocol, and we respectfully request immediate termination of the woman's presence in the household. Shaq's legal team responded with calm, deliberate evidence. Academic theft, duplicated research, the viral article, public response. But the court didn't deal in headlines. It dealt in records. They presented videos, Mira's interactions, her breakthroughs, her laughter, Alora's methods, the rhythms, the colors. But even that, the prosecution argued, could be framed as manipulation. She may have good intentions, the attorney said, but unqualified help, no matter how well-meaning, is still dangerous, especially for a child so vulnerable. Then came the quiet moment. The judge turned to Shaq. Mr. O'Neill, do you have anything you wish to say? He stood, large, grounded, measured. My daughter didn't speak for years, he said. Not a word, not a sentence, not even a sound that made sense to the people paid to help her. They gave me reports, diagnoses, deadlines, and told me I had to accept who she was, as if she was already finished. He glanced toward Alora. Then this woman came into our home. Quiet, careful. And instead of trying to fix my daughter, she listened to her. She saw a pattern the rest of us missed. And Mira responded, not to therapy, not to science, but to connection, to trust. His voice faltered slightly, the weight of everything pressing just beneath the surface. And now, you want to take her away. For not having a license. For following instinct that happened to be right when the entire system was wrong. If you do that, Your Honor, you're not protecting my daughter. You're punishing her for finally being seen. The judge nodded. Considered. I appreciate your words, Mr. O'Neill. But I must still base my decision on law and precedent. Before I render judgment, I'd like to hear from the child, if that's possible. The courtroom shifted. Mira sat in silence, small in her chair, her eyes scanning the room like shadows were chasing her across the walls. Alora leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. Remember the rhythm? 1, 2. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Mira blinked slowly. Her hand moved. Tap. Alora placed a small colored stone on the table. Blue, then another red. Shaq held his breath. Mira looked up, and then the moment cracked open. Don't take her away, Daddy. The voice was soft, accented, careful, but perfectly formed. The room froze. Even the judge's pen paused midair. Please, Mira continued, her eyes now locked on her father's. Alora, helps my words. A single tear slid down Alora's cheek, and she covered her mouth with her hand. Her whole body shook, but she didn't make a sound. Shaq sat, slowly, like his legs no longer had the strength to hold the weight of the moment. His eyes were glassed, but he didn't wipe them. No one moved. No one dared. The CPS attorney looked stunned, like the entire strategy had been blown apart in 6 syllables. The judge, an older woman with years of hard decisions behind her eyes, simply stared at Mira for a long moment before clearing her throat and folding her hands. Let the record show the child has made a voluntary verbal statement, she said softly, and that it contradicts claims of trauma or coercion. Outside, the media had already sensed something seismic. Word leaked before the hearing adjourned. Tweets exploded. Mira O'Neill speaks in court for first time. Headlines ran wild. By the time the judge announced her ruling, temporary clearance granted to Alora under supervised terms pending academic review, the world had already taken sides. Some questioned the decision. Others called it the miracle of the year. But inside the quiet heart of the courthouse, none of that mattered. What mattered was that Mira had spoken. Not because she was asked to, but because she chose to. After the hearing, Shaq led Mira outside into the garden behind the courthouse. No cameras, no microphones, just them, The wind blew softly through the trees, and Mara touched his chest with her hand. More words, she said, smiling. I have more words, Daddy. He wrapped his arms around her gently, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of possibilities. Back inside, Alora stood at the base of the courthouse steps, alone, watching. She didn't expect thanks. Didn't need applause. But when Mayra broke free from Shaq's side and ran toward her, arms wide, steps uneven but eager, Alora knelt, bracing for impact. Mayra threw her arms around her neck. Don't go, she whispered again. I'm not, Alora answered, holding her tightly. I'm right here. And for once, no law, no title, no system could argue with the truth standing right in front of them. Because it had a voice now, and it had just spoken. The fire didn't come from the courtroom. It came from the screens.
Every channel, every feed, every corner of the internet exploded in noise.
Within 24 hours of Mira's voice echoing through a silent courtroom, America was divided. Not over what she said, but what it meant. Some called it a miracle. Others a manipulation. NBA legend Gamble's daughter's health on Housemaid. Ran on one network. Unlicensed whisperer or hidden genius. Scrolled across another. Shaq's Risk, Genius or Reckless, became the trending podcast title of the week. Cable debates spun like a centrifuge. Pundits battled over credentials, race, ethics, and parental rights. One anchor, white, smug, polished in his tailored blue suit, declared, Shaquille O'Neal has crossed a line here. A child's mental health is not a playground for experimental therapy, especially not at the hands of a disgraced academic with a paper trail of accusations. His co-anchor nodded, feigning balance. But others argue she's a visionary who's being punished for exposing flaws in the system. Across social media, hashtags ignited, Voice of Mira, Let's Alora Stay, Big Shaq Risk, Whisper War. There were op-eds written by behavioral psychologists, defending Alora's methods, citing outcomes over certification. Others called her a dangerous symbol of anti-science populism. Civil rights leaders weighed in. Celebrities offered vague support or safe neutrality, but the crowd didn't want reason. They wanted sides. And Alora, caught in the center, remained silent. She refused all interview requests, declined every camera. She didn't tweet, didn't write statements. Shaq followed suit. He shut down his PR team, ignored press calls. Every time someone begged him to go on record, he offered the same answer. My daughter already said what needed to be said. But silence couldn't shield them from scrutiny. The university where Alora had once been erased now faced its own reckoning. After the viral article and mounting public pressure, MIT announced an internal ethics review of past doctoral theses. A carefully worded public statement described their concern over past procedural errors. But it wasn't enough. Because someone unknown, unseen, decided the truth needed more than subtle nods. One evening, a file leaked online. No watermark. No redaction, just a side-by-side, word-for-word comparison of Alora's original thesis and Cameron Stannis's published paper. Page after page, identical. Not paraphrased, not inspired. Stolen. In its entirety. The timestamps were intact. The source files linked to metadata. Embedded comments in Alora's draft. Her own notes, doubts, corrections. Appeared in the final Stannis publication with only minor edits. There was no more room for spin. The story changed overnight. The same pundits who had once called Alora a fraud now shifted their tone to tragic genius and victim of systemic theft. The academic world scrambled. Conferences where Stannis was scheduled to keynote quietly removed his name. His publisher suspended future titles pending investigation. A university board member resigned with a single statement. We failed her. But for Laura, vindication didn't feel like triumph. She stayed in the guest house Shaq had arranged for her, away from the noise, away from the mansion's rising security presence. News vans now camped daily at the edge of the private driveway. Drones hovered over the tennis courts. Someone even tried to bribe a landscaper for photos of Mayra in the garden. It was a circus. And still, Alora refused to speak. One night, Shaq walked the quiet gravel path between the main house and the guest house. It was after midnight. The wind was cool. The noise, for once, had died down. He found Alora sitting alone on the small porch, notebook in hand, a single pen moving across the page. She didn't look up. I never wanted to be known this way, she said. I know. They're saying I won. But they don't see her. They don't understand what really happened. Shaq leaned against the railing, watching the moonlight settle across the top of her notebook. They don't need to, he said. She understands. That's what matters. Alora closed the book softly. They want to make me a symbol, she whispered. The wrong kind. You don't owe them anything. She finally looked up, her voice brittle. But she does. She's the reason I remember who I was, who I still am. Shaq didn't speak, just placed a hand gently on her shoulder. And in that silence, the real firestorm, the one behind the headlines, finally cleared. Because while the world debated who was right, who was dangerous, who deserved what, the truth had already taken root. In a 10-year-old girl who spoke 6 words no one ever thought she could. In a father who chose instinct over institution. And in a woman the world once buried, who brought it all back with nothing but rhythm, color and quiet. Unshakable love. The fire kept raging outside. But inside that garden of words and silence, a new story had already begun. Alora's name, once buried in forgotten archives and whispered accusations, now lived in bold letters on screens, in journals, across podiums. But it didn't happen overnight. It began with a letter, not from a lawyer or a journalist, but from a university. 3 weeks after the leaked thesis comparison circulated globally, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology issued a formal apology. The institution acknowledges procedural failures and confirms that the work of Alora M. Dalton, submitted and internally archived in 2014, formed the foundational basis of subsequent research, published under other names. MIT extends an offer to award her the doctoral degree, originally withheld. The academic world responded like it had been waiting for a cue. Linguistics journals retracted papers. Panels opened up. Online seminars now quoted Alora's original phrases, the same ones once dismissed as unsubstantiated theory. Her terminology was no longer fringe, it was foundational. But Alora didn't seek revenge. She declined interviews from every major outlet, including a primetime slot on national television. She remained steady, still invisible by choice. Shaq, however, had other plans. He knew moments like this came rarely. Recognition wasn't enough. It had to mean something for others. Within 2 months, he launched the Silent Genius Project, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to unconventional therapies for nonverbal children, especially those on the autism spectrum. Its mission was simple: honor brilliance where the world failed to look. The project wasn't built on statistics or celebrity. It was built on one thing: results. They brought in educators who had walked away from rigid institutions, mothers who had created their own communication systems at home, and even dismissed researchers like Alora, who once dreamed on paper and were punished for it. The first program launched in Newark, then Atlanta, then Oakland. Within the year, there were 8 centers nationwide. At each location, there was a small plaque near the entrance, in honor of the unheard voices that changed everything. Alora remained at the heart of the work, but not as a figurehead. She spent her time training facilitators, rewriting her thesis into a guidebook, and developing curriculum not based on what was comfortable, but what worked. And Mara, she flourished. She didn't just speak now. She composed. Shaq converted a wing of the mansion into her private studio, filled with light, color-coded keys, tactile instruments, rhythm boards. Language had unlocked something far beyond vocabulary. Her mind processed emotion like symphony. She began writing short books using hybrid language formats: color, sound, symbol, word. Her first published piece, The Rhythm in the Blue Bowl, was released through the Foundation's imprint. The story followed a little girl who couldn't speak, and the woman who showed her how to listen to sound with her skin, not just her ears. The book was dedicated simply to E, because you stay. Later that year, Alora was invited to speak at Harvard. Not to defend herself, not to explain the scandal, but to lecture. The auditorium was packed. Scientists, educators, students who had studied her thesis only through the lens of controversy. There was no introduction, no slideshow. Alora stood behind the podium in a dark blue blouse and black trousers, eyes calm, voice measured. I didn't give Miara a voice, she began. I listened until she found her own. There was a hush so deep it pressed on the ribcage. We are taught to fix difference, she continued. To correct, train, normalize. But what if we instead translated? What if we listened in ways we were never trained to? What if brilliance sounds like silence to those who never learned to hear it? She paused, scanning the room. There are thousands of children across this country whose minds are speaking in patterns we have not yet named. And their silence is not absence. It's invitation. When she stepped down, the standing ovation wasn't for redemption. It was for revolution. Back home, Shaq watched the clip from his study. He didn't cry. He just smiled slowly, deeply. The kind of smile a father wears when he knows a promise has been kept. Later that week, the two of them walked together through the garden behind the mansion. No longer a secret place, but now a training site used by the foundation. Bowls of color-coded stones still lined the walkway. Wind chimes echoed familiar rhythms. Alora knelt beside one of the trays, fingers brushing over the old symbols she and Mira once used. The blue stone was still there. She changed me, Alora said softly. Shaq nodded. You changed each other. She taught me to forgive myself. To stop thinking failure was the final word. You gave her the first word, he said. That matters. They sat for a while under the olive tree, watching Mira across the lawn, leading a group of younger children in an activity she designed herself. An interlocking pattern game, using claps and hand signs. The sounds carried gently through the air, like poetry. Alora looked up, the sunlight warming her face. They'll forget my name again. Someday. Maybe, Shaq said, but not hers. She smiled. And that's enough. The world continued to spin faster now, noisier than ever. But beneath the buzz, something quiet had taken hold. A girl once silent, now taught others to speak. A father once lost in routine, now moved with purpose. And a woman once erased had written herself back into history, not with vengeance, but with patience. Not with volume, but with truth. And in a world obsessed with shouting, their story became a song only the listeners could truly hear. The gates no longer mattered. For years, the sprawling estate had been a fortress, iron bars, surveillance systems, security protocols fit for a man whose fame once required distance. But now, the only thing standing guard was a row of wild lavender bushes, growing freely along the entrance. Shaquille O'Neal had stepped away from the noise, and into a life that asked not for applause but attention. He retired not with a press conference, but with a letter posted quietly to his followers. I've had my time in the spotlight. Now I choose the silence between moments. I choose the guard. The world respected it. Some even envied it. But no one truly understood it, except those who walked through the garden gates and heard what lived beyond them. Inside the mansion, nothing was quite the same. The walls, once cool and austere, now carried the hum of something living, languages layered into laughter, footsteps echoing with purpose, songs in half-spoken Spanish and softly signed French. There was rhythm again, not rehearsed, not forced, just alive. The East Wing had been remodeled into a learning center, not for the public but for private sessions with families, children, and mentors. The core team from the Silent Genius Project held workshops there, with Alora often present, not as a figurehead, but a quiet guide, slipping into the background whenever the children found their own rhythm. She never liked the spotlight, and now, she didn't need it. The back garden, once a small stretch of stone and soil, was now a symphony of color. Raised planters in geometric rows, coated by shade, bowls filled with touchstones, language tools, rhythm boards, texture books. Wind chimes tuned to different tonal intervals played softly in the breeze. Children traced sounds with their fingers, matched beats with their breath. Some spoke, some signed, others danced their meanings through movement. It was a classroom without chalk, a language without hierarchy. And Mimura? She had become its architect. At 11, she was still reserved, still selective with her words. But each one she chose landed with the weight of a poem. She no longer needed Alora to lead her. She created her own methods now, her own structures, her own codes. Her first children's book, The Girl Who Counted the Wind, debuted in independent bookstores with little marketing, but grew on its own merit. It told the story of a girl who didn't speak in words, but in wind rhythms, teaching a woman how to listen with her skin instead of her ears. It sold quietly, but widely. Parents wrote in letters. Children scribbled symbols in the margins of their copies. Shaq read the book at night, more than once. Not because he needed to understand it, but because it reminded him how far they had come. He no longer asked Miore to fit into the world. Instead, he let the world shape itself around her. They spent afternoons walking the garden, sometimes saying nothing, just breathing the same air. She'd hum, or click her tongue in rhythm. He'd tap back. They had their own song, a language without need for translation. One day, sitting beside the koi pond, Mira looked up at him. "Do you miss the crowd?" Shaq smiled. "Not even a little." "Do you miss the sound?" He thought for a moment, then gently shook his head. "I hear everything I need now." She nodded and skipped a stone across the water. It bounced once, twice, then sank. "You used to be loud," she said. He chuckled. "I did. But now you're quiet. Because I finally learned how to listen." In the months that followed, the Silent Genius project expanded further. Without advertising, word of mouth moved faster than strategy ever could. Families flew in from other countries. Mothers cried when their children clapped for the first time. Fathers recorded entire sessions, trying to understand the symphony in simplicity. And through it all, Alora remained steady. She refused honorary degrees, turned down book deals, declined a biopic. Instead, she kept working, writing, teaching, designing tools with the team that grew from the soil of her failure. She was no longer trying to reclaim her past. She was building futures. One evening, a special visitor arrived. Someone who once sat at the heart of the storm. The judge from the hearing, now retired. She came without press, without announcement, just curiosity. She sat in the garden during a session and watched the children move like waves. Some in silence, others in murmured phrases, all perfectly understood by those who'd learned to listen. Afterward, she turned to Alora. "I gave you time," she said, "but the world gave you space. And she gave me reason." Alora replied, nodding toward Mira, who was teaching a younger boy how to color-code vowel sounds using translucent tiles. The judge shook her head slowly. "We almost took this away. But you didn't," Alora said. "That's what matters." There was no final scene to mark the end of the journey. No curtain call. No scripted applause. Just a new way of being. A revolution that didn't roar, but rustled, hummed, pulsed through the roots of what had once been silence. Shaq spent his mornings now walking the perimeter of the property, not to protect it, but to feel it, to remind himself of how far the quiet could carry a voice. Sometimes, he'd stop outside the main hall and hear Mira reciting something softly to a group of students. Her cadence deliberate. Her tone Sometimes, she said once, the loudest thing you can say is nothing, if the person beside you is willing to hear it all. And that was the legacy. Not in trophies, not in charts, but in rhythm, in stone, in wind, and in every child with silence in their heart who now, finally, had a place where their voice could begin. The mansion once too big and too quiet, now echoed with the one sound Shaq had waited a lifetime to hear. Life on its own terms. What if the next breakthrough in education isn't in a lab, but in a living room? What if the voices we've overlooked carry the codes to unlock others? This isn't just a story, it's a mirror, a question, a movement. Listen closer. The revolution is quiet, but it's already speaking. And the ones who hear it change everything.